unfortunately, we must move on to how Britain is not a Christian country anymore.
Okay.
I'm not trying to dispirit everyone. According to the recent census data, we're in a minority here. For the first time in a census of England and Wales, less than half of the population, 46.2%, so that's 27.5 million people, describe themselves as Christian. A 13.1 percentage point increase from 59.3% in 2011. Despite this decrease. Despite this decrease, Christian remained the most common response to the religion question. So the main issue is twofold. Christianity is still the most popular religion. However, the decrease is coming from a rise in atheism. So no religion was the second most common response, increasing by 12 percentage points to 37.2%, 22.2 million, up from 25.2% in 2011. So within 10 years, it's gone up 12%. But then mass immigration has also caused the Muslim response to go up by 6.5% from 2011. So, to 6.5%, up from 4.9%. So that's a pretty significant jump of some incompatible worldviews. And of course, it would be haram to mention some issues that might arise from this, like female genital mutilation, or cousin marriage, or intolerance towards your gay neighbours and thinking that they should suffer the same penalties are in most Islamic countries. Or sex-selective abortion might be one, which actually gets raised in the abortion debate, which we'll be covering very shortly.
Or in divorce courts, the ability to say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. Yeah. That's what happens in Islam, and that's it.
And then the Candyman appears in the mirror.
You're done. Yes.
But so
lots
what?
Of Sharia law, yeah.
So what, says Javed, I suppose.
So what?
Well, here's a segment we did a little while ago. This segment, we're actually going to be exploring the implications of abandoning the sanctity of life under the Christian principle in the UK. So this segment about a week ago, Harry went through the fact they want to bring Canada's assisted dying policy to the UK. Yeah, and Canada, it's one of their leading causes of death now. They're offering it to disabled veterans who can't get their stair lifts installed quick enough. They're doing adverts about women who are terminally ill and their treatment will take too long, so they just off themselves, and they say it's beautiful. They've offered it to people whose only listed health conditions are either mental or they've had hearing loss, so they get offed. And some of them, they've said, oh, your treatment's going to take too long, even if you're not terminally ill. Why don't you just do this as an option instead? One man got euthanized because he was homeless.
Yeah, there was a lady who'd got a stair lift installed. Do you see that?
Yeah, she was
in her 50s or in her 60s, and they'd said
they'd offered it to her. Yeah,
they offered it to her. Do you want to bump yourself off? Canada has gone down such a dark. Well, all countries have, but particularly the last 2.5 years has gone down such a dark path. I can only come to the conclusion that Satan is walking amongst us.
Well, it's what happens when you penetrate your cabinets, isn't it? When you install people that think that China's model is the one to be emulated. And as we said in our prior segment about the fact that housing is under such stress, or something like the NHS, for example, you can either decrease demand by lowering immigration, but we couldn't do that because, of course, that would be racist and unthinkable, or you can just bump a lot of the population off.
Yeah.
It would be really compassionate for you to save the NHS by not using its services. But this is what happens when you don't have a ring around the sanctity of life. And one of the things that Christianity does undoubtedly provide, whether or not the members of our audience can make the leap to faith or are just very skeptical about the existence of God without any empirical proof, okay, that's fine, have that conversation. But you can't deny about the fact that Christians really do think that you just can't arbitrarily kill people. Like, some Christians, plenty of Catholics as well, are on board with the death penalty, but that's a question of innocence.
Yes.
But you can't take an innocent human life. You can't just euthanize someone. You can't be a Harold Shipman. You can't be Kermit Gosnell and mass abort babies. Yeah. And so that's a good bulwark as a moral sentiment to create legislation around. When you take that out of civilization, what happens? You get the unconscionable abortion debate that we've currently got going on in the UK. If you'd like to learn more about the intricacies of this sort of stuff, you can subscribe to the website. If we go to the next one,
look
please,
at two
John.
very handsome men.
Well, yeah, Josh will be glad about the compliment in this one as well, because Josh and I decided to debate the biological and moral implications of abortion procedures. We didn't particularly agree, but we did so very civilly, and hopefully it gives you guys some new ideas, and always happy to read the arguments in the comments. So pay $5 a month is better than giving it to Netflix, and you might learn something new. Speaking of abortion in the UK, this is tied up very much with the loss of Christian sentiment, because we are seeing an expansion of abortion permissions up until the point of birth and a complete moral apathy to the life of the child.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's a recent case that was lost on appeal, because last year she lost it and and took it up again. I believe she's now taking it to Supreme Court. A woman with Down syndrome called Heidi Crowter, she's 27, she's from Coventry, has lost her appeal over the fact that in the UK, we have a 24-week limit on any abortion that is not without a medical reason. If it's for a medical reason, including Down syndrome or a cleft palate, or even a club foot, it can be up until the point of birth. So as the mother is dilating, the baby's being produced, you can just crack its skull open and chuck it in the bin, to put it crassly. And she decided, well, as someone with Down syndrome has had quite a full and wholesome life, I don't think we should all be killed in the womb. Like,
we wouldn't have David Starkey. You know, he was born with club feet.
Really? Mm-hmm. I didn't know that.
We would not have David Starkey as a historian.
Well, one of the most egregious cases, for example, and I can speak of a bit of personal outrage on this, and depending on where you think Twitter's going, you're glad that Elon Musk is around. During COVID, there were do not resuscitate orders placed on children on ventilators because they had autism.
Yes. The evil, sorry, just going slightly aside from what we're talking about, the Christianity, is what gives me some hope is that I was at an event on Sunday, and a lot of people in the room were talking about Christ and God, and you don't have to be reverent. You can be like me. I mean, I'm a Christian. Okay, someone said to me actually, "God, you use the C word an awful lot for a Christian," and I said, yeah, but you can still be a Christian and use the C word and be irreverent. That's okay. It's good deeds. People talk a lot about, what things people say and their appearance, and you don't have to wear tweed to be a small C conservative or a libertarian. You don't have to wear a dog collar to have faith in Christ and believe in good deeds. You can be a woman with big tits, and big blonde hair, and also have faith in Christ. And humanity.
And humility, of course.
And humility.
Clearly. Yeah,
I won't be getting into a pulpit anytime soon. Connor says, cool, thank you.
We'll leave that to Calvin.
Yeah.
One of the things that I spoke about Carl recently, funnily enough, is that I think it's pretty clear that there is such a level of evil at work at the moment, you could describe it as demonic. And there are some people so incapable of reason, they act as if they are possessed. So if 2,000 years ago there was a book that was slightly right about that, but I can't wrap my head around the God thing, but it's right about a lot of other things, it's more likely that my contemporary doubts about the existence of the deity that it bases everything on is wrong than all of the things it gets right are correct, but it's just wrong about the God part. So it's more likely that I'm wrong for doubting than the book that gets everything else right is correct. And seeming that as it's predicted, the weird demonic possession of people that take their children to Drag Queen Story Hour, for example, I'm willing to bet that if there's that level of evil that aids and abets that level of abuse, there must be some sort of example of good which we can all follow, which is an antibody reaction to that. So perhaps I'm just living in naive hope, but it seems to have something to it.
And also, interestingly, this goes slightly to the heart of things I've been looking at recently. The Hippocratic Oath, which is the original thing in ancient Greece that the doctors, they were all a brotherhood of, it was very important. The Hippocratic Oath is all to do with this ethics and first principles and first do no harm and do not administer poison into another human being, or do not recommend. It actually says that in the original. Do not recommend that a poison be administered. Otherwise, you should leave the profession. You're sort of cast out for doing. So we have to go. This all ties in Christianity. Its first principles is what's at the heart of this. Is God and Christ are at the heart of it. And if they're not in the centre of it, then that vacuum will be filled. And that's what we're seeing now.
Yep.
It's being filled by something very putrid and sulphur-like.
Funnily enough, speaking on the abortion issue of, if we can just go back slightly, John, of injecting the poison into children, they're doing it because the children are disabled. So it's
just horrific. I mean, 1930s Nazi Germany, anyone?
Yeah.
Ring any bells?
So the abortion care provider BPAS, leading in Britain, said that her case to stop Down syndrome babies being aborted up until the point of birth was, quote, a full frontal attack on pregnant women's rights. Right. So we're not going to have any conversation about disability here. The woman who brought this case said that she's going to keep fighting, so all the best with her on that. Unfortunately, Parliament, well, some of the MPs have voted this motion down, but for legal reasons. But Parliament, the sentiment, especially if Labour win, are going to be very much against her on this. Because we go to the next one. This petition passed recently to include abortion rights in the Bill of Rights that we're creating after we leave the ECHR.
Right.
And that would be not just decriminalisation, but just open the door. Because
sort of encouraging it.
yes,
Going,
well,
go on then. It's
let's put it this
buying
way:
a pair of curtains.
if there's nothing, if you have rights to an abortion, there's no reason to make it safe, legal, and rare, is there? Because if it's a right, why should it need to be rare at all? What's the prohibition on it?
Yes.
Because it would be contradictory to say it's gross and it's your right. And so this would open the door to abortion up until the point of birth in Britain for any reason. They're not even hiding the fact that it's just for disabilities anymore.
Yes.
This was recently debated, and this was after Roe v. Wade was overturned, and some American dual national said that in the wake of the United States Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, in a landmark decision, the United Kingdom must enshrine abortion rights in the new UK Bill of Rights. Abortion rights are healthcare rights, what an Orwellian phrase, not just for individuals who wish to be pregnant, mothers, women, but also for those who do, for ectopic pregnancies, to finish a natural miscarriage, or if the mother or fetus's life is at risk. Again, an infinitesimally small part of that. And those are concessions, all of which will be made by people who are against abortion in every other case, but say, in the instance of saving a mother's life, it's a tragedy, but it's not something to be promoted. So this is just a sort of Trojan horse thing. If we go to this one, there's a transcript here that you can read the full debate for yourself. I just wanted to play two quotes, though. And they're both from Jacob Rees-Mogg. And Jacob Rees-Mogg is one of the few outspoken Catholics in Parliament. A couple of his colleagues, Northern Irish fella, Fiona Bruce, they spoke quite eloquently. But I will say that Jacob Rees-Mogg came hot off the heels of Stella Creasy, right? Stella Creasy spearheaded this, and she's spearheading it in Parliament. And she said platitudes like abortion is healthcare, that she'd allow abortion under any circumstances because a doctor would not be able to refuse abortions, of course, upon request without being penalised because it's a right, you can't confiscate rights. And then she compared abortion to vasectomies and ankle replacements and said, we don't treat any other procedure this way, and it doesn't matter that this is the only procedure with another life involved because it's the woman's body. So she was just dogmatically repeating left-wing talking points. Jacob Rees-Mogg, however, really grappled with the historical, the philosophical, and the theological arguments. And it's a shame we don't hear other politicians talk this way anymore because Christianity has retreated from public life. So we can just play the first one, please, John.
To the point made by my right-hand friend, the member for New Forest East, he said we can't look at it in terms of numbers of cities and people like that. But we can because there are over 100,000 people in Northern Ireland who are alive today who would not be alive had Northern Ireland had the abortion rules that we have in England, Wales and Scotland. And that seems to me to be a modern tragedy, that there is this number of people who are no longer, had no opportunity for a life because they were ripped untimely from their mother's womb. And when we think about this, and we think of the numbers of 214,869, in a four-year period, the destruction of life is as great as it was in the four-year period of the First World War. Those are the numbers that we are dealing with, and that is the tragedy of abortion.
I mean, when you put it in that scale, it's I don't want to say depressing, but you are taken aback by the fact that we've extricated a sense of the sanctity of life from our politics, instead to say that it is entirely only the concern of the woman having it. It's definitely not the concern of the man, as was brought up in this and immediately shot down.
Yes.
And the child has no obligation by its own parents or the medical establishment, as you said, to be protected. That's the scale of devastation we have, the level of many war deaths. I mean, but nobody else puts it in that level of poetic language. And I think the reason is, and as we'll come on to in clip 2, is the conviction of his faith that actually lets him stand behind this, because very few other people will throw themselves on this sword, unfortunately.
Yeah, and what would be nice is if the people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, the conviction of his faith also extended to other things that have been given to children, to babies.
Agree.
And we'll leave it at that.
Yes.
Certain big pharma entities.
I agree.
You can't just be partly...
You can't be selective.
You can't be partly Christian. You have to go the full gamut.
I spoke to Rees-Mogg once about the online harms bill, and he seemed pretty apathetic about putting that through, when that would have been rather punitive to Christ were he around. And
Yes.
someone else asked him about the abortion bill, and they said, is there any appetite for legislation? He said, well, I and a couple of colleagues have put it forward, but it is just the axiomatic belief in the Conservative Party that it's a woman's right to choose to kill her child. And as we saw in the previous segment about the leftism that's in the Conservative Party, it shouldn't be shocking, but it's also the absence of an objective, inviolable sense of life has fundamentally damaged British legislation, is leading to more dead babies and eventually more dead adult disabled people, people with mental health problems, or just people who are too inconvenient for the system to pay for anymore.
Yes. I mean, it's dark. It really is dark. A sort of tyranny, I don't know, wrapped up in a, called something else. It's a sort of it's things we've seen in history that are usually more dramatic, more obvious, like Stalin, Hitler, Pol Pot, or Mao.
It's a purge masqueraded as compassion.
Yes, we're back to the long march through the institutions. It's silently been creeping up to this point. And I just hope it's not too late. I mean, that's why it's good that we're talking about this kind of stuff now, because we need to get cracking.
Exactly.
We need to get on with it.
So if we just like to play the second one, this I thought was just the best way to put it, and it's because it comes from his conviction of faith. So
I just slightly correct what he's just said. It's not the destruction of life in many cases, it's the destruction of potential life, unless one agrees, as I think he would agree with our honourable friend from Congleton, that life begins at the moment of conception. But most people don't agree with that. They believe it develops during the course of gestation. And that's why my right honourable friend and neighbour is right when he says that the embryo acquires rights along the way, but not from the outset.
Well, my right honourable friend raises the question of the viability of life. The viability of life, when does that start, Sir Charles? When do you think a life becomes a fully independent, created life? Perhaps my right honourable friend thinks that we should be like the ancient Romans, the newborn baby. Saint Marcina, who rescued newborn babies who were exposed in ancient Rome because their life wasn't viable without intervention, without support. They were allowed to die until the early Christians went and saved them, thought to be peculiar for doing so, particularly, as it happens, disabled babies. And we know that the abortion laws that we have allow for full-term termination, full-term abortion for babies with minor disabilities, as my honourable friend, the member for Congleton, pointed out. This is the tragedy of abortion, of the destruction of life. And my right honourable friend wants to quibble about when life begins, and I accept this is perhaps more a theological question. What is the start of life? But that new embryo has that potential for life. It has been formed as a separate being that is separate and different from the parents from which it came. And of course I give way to the Honourable Lady.
That when Stella Creasy gets on.
Yeah, she does start shouting at him. He finishes... Yeah. Well, I thought Stella Creasy was particularly morbid, considering last year she complained that she couldn't bring her newborn baby into the sitting session of Parliament, and now she's saying you should be able to kill it up until the point of birth. Right.
Right, yeah.
You would feel very uncomfortable as her kid watching her contributions back.
Yes, there was a lot of leftist contradiction in there. They just love, don't they? They love nihilism.
Yeah.
They love destroying things.
Because nihilism is the prerequisite to totalitarianism.
Yeah.
And often it's unfortunately Christianity that is used as a weapon against this, because it keeps saying, oh, Jesus would have let all the refugees in, don't be a bigot. Oh, Jesus would have given up all his material possessions. They're using your principles against you, which they only half understand, because Jesus was fairly militant. He did say, sell your cloak so you can at least buy a sword to defend yourselves from these Satanists. Yeah. Right? And in using your own principles against you, which they don't hold, they get you to concede ground to their ideological goals, and then they just conquer you because they don't share the inviolability of life principle that you have as well. Mogg finished his section just with the quote of, I think this petition misfires. I think it is wrong constitutionally and much more wrong morally because it prefers death to life. Now, it would be wonderful if everyone else had Mogg's conviction. Unfortunately, they don't. So this was a follow-up from this segment here, saying that you can't talk about abortion in the UK, which got fact-checked by the NHS saying that
Of course it did.
here's where you can access abortions under our video.
What?
Yeah.
The NHS put that under the...
Yeah, it's a little
Oh
bar
my
there.
God.
Context.
Yes.
Abortion health information is a link to the website talking about where
Suppose
you
it
can get
hasn't
the
got
abortion.
COVID-19. Is it? Are you infected with... Oh,
Yes.
NHS. National
So
Death Service.
So this was a segment on the Bournemouth Conservative Council, who were lobbied by pro-abortion activists to institute a censorship radius around abortion clinics. So a no-go zone, basically, where you could be arrested if you were perceived to be protesting, drawing, or praying. So you can't pray in the vicinity of an abortion centre. I have an update on this. If we go to the next one, they're being sued, so that's nice. Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council is being taken to court for introducing the buffer zone to, as the BBC frames it, protect staff and visitors from protests. So this is Christian Concern, who've worked with Calvin before, who've said the council's consultation held prior to its introduction was questionable. BCP Council said it was seeking legal advice in considering its position. Of course they were. Just fix the TV. Supported by the Christian Legal Centre, the group said that the 429-foot, 150-metre buffer zone around the British Pregnancy Advisory Group's BPAS clinic in Opier Road in Bournemouth makes prayer illegal, which it does. It can punish it with jail time, up to 6 months in jail, in fact. Now, I wish them all the best with this, but they're fighting an uphill battle because if we go to the next one, the MPs want to make this nationwide, led by, who do you think? Stella Creasy. Plans to enforce buffer zones around abortion clinics in England and Wales have been backed by MPs. The amendment to the government's public order bill, remember the one that was censoring noisy protests, that was meant to be for Extinction Rebellion and
Yes.
wasn't. Instead, it persecutes Christians, right?
Of course it does.
It was approved by MPs by 297 votes to 110. I believe this was at the end of October. Former Prime Minister Theresa May and Leader of the Commons Penny Mordaunt were among those backing the buffer zones. So one's childless and the other one works for the WEF. Home Secretary Suella Braverman and fellow cabinet ministers Jacob Rees-Mogg and Kemi Badenoch voted against it. So the few that are picked out as maybe hopeful, Kemi I'm still a bit iffy on, but she's right on some issues. Stella Creasy said that the buffer zones protect women accessing a very specific type of healthcare. That's like saying that the ritualistic shamans of the Aztecs are practicing a particular type of meteorology when they're cutting out children's hearts to stop the storm god for sending a thundercloud.
That is quite a niche, quite a niche reference. But yeah, it's true.
Well, it's child sacrifice.
Yeah.
Child sacrifice
child
for
sacrifice.
a completely different religious reason, but Creasy says it does not stop free speech on abortion. Well, yeah, it does, by definition.
Yeah.
It stops you speaking out against abortion if you're near an abortion clinic where the abortions happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't stop people protesting.
this
It
is
simply
worrying.
says you shouldn't have the right to do this in the face of somebody, and very often these people are right up in front of people. Yes, quietly praying right up in front of someone.
Absolutely disgraceful. How
Yeah.
dare you quietly pray?
I suppose
In my
informed
vicinity.
consent no longer matters. Oh, but we can't go there because we're on YouTube, can we?
Yeah, damn.
Unfortunately, and we'll finish with this, the Anglican Church are complicit in this because you have apologists like this who appeared on Calvin Robinson's Sunday GB News show. Best one on the network, by the way. Go and watch it every Sunday. He really appreciates it. Reverend Michael Coran, who has since cried about the amount of Twitter messages he's got on here saying, oh, Jesus wouldn't have hated me for this, has said, there is nothing in the Bible that speaks out against abortion. Let's listen to this clip, shall we?
Let's redefine what's really going on here. In the United States, many, let's say pro-life, I would say anti-choice, but if to use your terminology, pro-life organizations have been classified by the FBI as terrorist groups. Doctors who perform abortions have been killed. They have been disabled for life by being wounded. People have been attacked, beaten up, arson attacks. We had an arson attack in Toronto on an abortion clinic. There's a context here. Now, it's not actually about the I would agree in this case, if they're outside the buffer zone, it is outrageous that anything should happen to them. But I do believe in buffer zones so that women who are taking advantage of their right, whether you agree with it or not, but reproductive health, to go in for a termination, I know you disagree, but they should be able to do that without harassment. The fact that these women were
Prayer is not harassment.
No, hold on. Within the buffer zone, outside
even within the buffer zone, prayer is never harassment.
I know inside the buffer zone, I say no. Outside the buffer zone, shout, pray, because that's what the law is. You can't extend the law in an arbitrary way and say you're outside the zone, but even so, I'm going to move you.
No,
I disagree.
I'm sorry, Father. The law is immoral. You should never be able to outlaw prayer. And for a cleric in holy
women.
For a clerk in holy orders to be on national television saying it's okay to outlaw prayer, I'm baffled by
It is not okay. It is absolutely vital to protect the right of women to go go into a clinic and say, this is my choice. And for them to be harassed, to feel threatened, to be intimidated, that is sinful.
Not only are you condoning the outlaw of prayer, you're condoning abortion as a Christian minister?
Well, Scripture defines life as beginning at the first breath. The Old Testament also recommends abortion in certain cases. And if you want to get into that argument, we can. But be reasonable here. There is not going to be one group saying, we have won, we have lost. Abortion is part of the law. Women who want an abortion should be allowed to have. Those who want to protest should be allowed to, but within a certain region. What I've said is, if they're outside the buffer zone, no one has a right to stop them. I think that's a reasonable compromise.
Right, so we couldn't be more wrong, especially considering this sounds like apologetics for an immoral law, much like a Christian saying, oh, it's all right, leave the Romans to feed the Christians to the lions. It's the law. You would have aided and abetted the destruction of your fellow worshippers how many years ago? But when he says that Scripture doesn't say anything about life starting before the first, I can't remember if he said prayer or breath.
The first breath.
Breath. Yeah,
Breath.
No. No. There's literally the verse of Jeremiah that says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And he picked him out to be a prophet. So no. Also, you're superseding God's role in creating life there. So you're bestowing upon yourself the power of God to take a life. Not good. There's also this old chestnut, Exodus, thou shalt not murder. Might be a bit of a stick in the mud for people who want to go and kill the babies. And then I thought I'd finish with this little verse here, which was Matthew 18. If anyone causes one of the little ones who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a millstone fastened around his neck and drowned in the depths of the sea. Interpret that however you wish. Of course, there are immoral consequences from straying from, as we both said, the sanctity of life stemming from a moral source. I understand there are people that genuinely haven't found it convincing. Fair enough, But I think we can all agree that this stuff is reprehensible, and you can see a straying away from the principle that we shouldn't kill babies in the womb, and we shouldn't kill people just because they're old, because the state finds it convenient, has produced demonstrably terrible outcomes. Yeah. And it's gotten to the point now where our politicians are, well, as Nietzsche once said, God is dead in our culture, and there is not enough water in the world to wash the blood from the hands of the people who are acting like Pontius Pilate and just going, not my fault, Gov.
Yeah. Another slight point of historical interest, back to the Hippocratic Oath. In the Hippocratic Oath, it actually says that a pessary should not be given to a woman to induce an abortion. That's in the original Greek Hippocratic Oath. Also, 1973, the US Supreme Court abandoned the Hippocratic Oath. I was going to say banned, but I don't think they quite banned it, but they just said it's pointless, don't use it anymore.
Interesting.
3 years later, swine flu appeared, and the then President Gerald Ford panicked.
Had to rescind it, yes.
Rescinded it. Then there was a mass, shall we say, medical procedures on, I think it's 40 million people in the States, and that had to be withdrawn very quickly because of the deaths. This ringing any bells? So it was 73, Hippocratic Oath was US Supreme Court said, forget it. 3 years later, that's what we see. That I read that a couple of days ago. I thought that's when I knew I was coming off. That's interesting. So again, we're back to this first principles things: Hippocratic Oath, Bible, first principles in politics, education. We've strayed away from this kind of central tenets.
Let's hope
of a lot of things.
Let's hope our first principles are a bit like Christ and quite good at resurrections, eh?
Thanks for watching that segment from the podcast Lotus Eaters. I hope you're all having a very jolly time. If you're interested in finding more, you can subscribe to our website, lotuseaters.com, for £5 a month, and find all of our premium content available for you there, including this recent video that Connor and I did on the politics of Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, because we watched it and suffered, so you didn't have to. If you'd like to find more from what's going on with Connor, you can follow him over at Getter at Con_Tomlinson. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.